Welcome back to yet another Mediterranean archaeology presentation. This is week 5, and in week 5 we are studying the Bronze Age. In particular, I am focusing on two subsequent Bronze Age civilizations, namely the Minoans and Mycenaeans. I promised you, I think I promised you some eye candy this week. I'm certainly going to deliver a lot of amazing pictures that I hope you'll really enjoy. So yes, this is going to be a long presentation in terms of the number of slides, but hopefully I won't bend your ear for too long. And I will also post a PowerPoint, a PDF version of this presentation so you can look through the images again, as well as slides with words on them when you're studying for things like exams. So the Bronze Age, here we are. By the way, the image in the back of this slide is that of a gold Minoan double axe. So when you think of the word axe and an axe implement, you imagine something that would be used for chopping things or used in warfare, but gold is a very soft metal. And where we see this image of double axes drawn on things and put in places within Minoan context that imply that they are related to ritual and religion somehow, perhaps a symbol of power. So when I say Bronze Age, I could make you suffer and insist that you learned weird dates like 3561 or something like that, but that's mean. So how about some round dates here? So when I say Bronze Age, I'm talking circa 4000 to 1000 BC. When I talk early Bronze Age, and I might refer to it as EBA, I'm talking the early part of that, more or less 4000 to about 1500 BC. And when I'm talking late Bronze Age, LBA, I'm talking basically about 1500 to 1000 BC. So let's get started here. I'm gonna the first half of this presentation, or perhaps a little more than half, is going to be focused on the Minoans. When I talk about the Minoans, I'm talking about a culture that emerged initially on the island of Crete. Their cultural center is on that island, but we also know that they have a settlement on the island of ancient Thera, or modern Santorini. And in fact, the remains of that settlement called Akrotiri, which I don't have listed here, and I'll have written down in a later slide, but the Akrotiri remains are really some of the best remains we have for the Minoans. Unfortunately, the settlement in Akrotiri suffered a similar fate as that of Pompeii, in that it was covered by a volcanic eruption. So everything in the settlement was more or less preserved. So looking at the map here, you should be feeling pretty familiar with maps, certainly since your week 2 exercise. I'm just showing you their cultural center of Crete here in red, the big red island, and the little island in the southern part of the Cyclades of ancient Thera, or modern Santorini, as another cultural center for the Minoans. Closing in here on that cultural center, the island of Crete, I think this is a pretty cool map myself, because in this map you can see all the different areas throughout the island that exercised Minoan culture in one way or another. Either they were what we call palace sites, and I'll get to that, talking about that turn a bit more in a few minutes, but those palace sites, let's just call them larger population areas, or perhaps political centers even. And those are excuse me, indicated by the red dots, Country houses, well, that's one way of put it. We see smaller centers where there's one largest structure that may have been inhabited by an elite, and they could be considered villages with a substantial hierarchy, or something like, a Roman, in the Roman times you have villas. And in the black dots, those indicate burial sites, or place, or smaller settlements throughout the island. And finally, the triangles indicate. I'm sorry, I skipped the stars. But the stars and triangles indicate ritual places. There are typically two kinds of ritual places on the island: that of mountain sanctuaries, or of sacred caves. And towards the end of the Minoan section here, I'll give you at least one example of each. I obviously cannot cover all these sites. Totally impossible. So I'm going to focus on a random sample of these kinds of sites. So reiterating some of what you read in the Runnels and Murray readings in particular, that by 6000 BC we see that occupation in the island of Crete is primarily on the hilltops. Fields are primarily in the valley areas, so they're going down to the valleys to engage in agriculture and coming back up where it's safe on the hilltops. As we go through time, we see a slow move and greater reliance on that agriculture, especially in the way of cereal crops. Now, the plants that they are relying on, these cereal crops, it's interesting to note, are not indigenous to this island. Neither are the domesticated animals that they're utilizing. Both the plants and the animals are coming from Western Asia. So from here, though, we start to see the growth of a stratified society, the emergence of social hierarchies with a really small elite at the top of that hierarchical pyramid. After about 4000 BC, things change. We see the first use of bronze and an increasing use of that bronze. Thus, we call the Bronze Age. People tend to move from the hilltops down to the valleys where they were engaging in agriculture, and that dependence on agriculture becomes more intense. We start to see the emergence of towns, and in these towns we see structures that we've labeled corridor houses. On the top right of the slide, I show an example of a reconstructed corridor house. The reason they're called corridors is you see after the entryway, you enter, and then there is this long sort of corridor. Really, yeah, that's it. That's why they're called corridor houses. We also see the emergence after 4000 BC of the beginnings of monumental architecture, big scale construction that can only be done by organizing people in mass. We also see the beginning of the use of the plow, which is a technology that's also coming from, initially invented in Mesopotamia. We see evidence of trade activity and a rapid population growth. All is going well. Population is growing. The settlements are flourishing until something happens. At about 2250 BC, we start to see a series of destructions that continue on for about a century or more. So those destructions, we don't really know exactly what's going on, but we do know it's violent. And we also know that Crete is not the only place that experiences these destructions. They occurred around the Aegean, in Asia Minor, and in Greece. And lots of sites throughout these areas were abandoned during this period of time. Some areas, especially in the Cyclades, may even have been completely depopulated. Minoan Crete begins to build, however, in a whole new way at the end of these destructions. We see that a change in material culture, and it's actually quite dramatic. We also see that architecture uh, begins to take on a truly monumental scale, and they start to have the appearance of these big structures that look like the one that I've given you, the example I've given you here in the bottom right hand corner. These sort of sprawling villages, these ever connecting uh, conglomerate of rooms that are multi-stories tall. We don't know what to call them. Our best word that we have is a palace. Now, I've been known to if you took my introduction to archaeology class, then you'll know that I shamefully chastised the author of the book for that class for having called these particular constructions temples. But to be fair, he's not wholly wrong. He's getting that term from a bad source, and he's since corrected it in later editions. But the reason that you might call it temple is because that we have lots of evidence to suggest that, well, religious use is part of the use of this sprawling construction. Residential use, perhaps community use. It's a very interesting complex of rooms that sort of defies our description. So what sort of elements can we find in one of these palaces? As I said, they're best explained by, residents or sprawling community centers or sprawling villages. We know there is a residential portion, like I said, and it's relatively opulent and large. It's probably used by some kind of resident elite. We think that perhaps this elite is involved with both political administration and perhaps in charge of the religious realm as well. The structures may have these sprawling structures may have included craftspeople, and that were all engaged in, like I said, a sort of as a part of the community. The palaces were not the only thing that were in the landscape, because settlement or cultural activity or structures associated with that palace continued beyond the edge of the palaces themselves. They're surrounded by a large range of dependent structures, in fact, which include large private residences, cult centers, mortuary complexes. In fact, at the Palace of Malia, which is one of those palaces, one of those red dots that you had in that map, there's even an underground area with pillared rooms, like on a basement level, which is kind of extraordinary. So the pictures I've shown you here, by the way, are pictures of the palace site at Knossos, which is perhaps the largest one on the island. And it's the first one that was excavated. You can certainly see in the picture, stone walls, sometimes rather thick, like in the bottom one, evidence of columns. The invention of columns is something that's the columns were invented in Egypt. So these are technologies that are coming overseas. So this is a pretty good view of one of these palace structure complexes. This is the one at Knossos. This is good because it gives you a sort of legend, lets you know the uses of some of the particular areas in this particular image at that palace. But don't let it deceive you. I mean, it looks ominous as it is, but then add 5 to 7 stories on top of that and you get sort of awe-inspiring. Yeah, 5 to 7 stories. The lower courses are built out of cut stone blocks, so this takes specialized craftsmanship. Upper walls are made of plaster-covered rubble. The rooms are large, mostly. Numerous windows and doors throughout. Light wells. I don't know if you know what a light well is, but it's kind of a... how do I describe this just verbally? It's kind of like a big square hole in the middle of your structure in which light and air comes in. And imagine that big square hole. There are windows at each level that let the light and air in on each level. There's a drainage system in place and a hydraulic system even, which provided drinking water and bathing water and a few flush toilets. Lots and lots of storage areas. Those storage areas are often these that over here, like in number 10, that sort of look, they call them magazines here. That's just a fancy word for storage areas. So these are all sort of very original. They're not getting this kind of architectural ideas from Egypt, even though the column is coming from Egypt. Certainly the design of these structures is completely unique to Crete. They're rooms that don't follow a particular design. Yes, we have lots of magazines together, and presumably that was important to have all those together. Perhaps it was, important that they be adjacent to other areas of activity. The residential areas are elsewhere here, as you can especially see on 13, where you can see the grand staircase leading to these residential areas. Now, this palace at Knossos isn't the only one that looks, has these design elements in mind. The other palace structures on the island of Crete also have some of the same elements, and they too look like sprawling sort of conglomerations of rooms, but they do not follow the exact same design. There will be, however, a couple of things they have in common that let us know for sure. They're definitively of the same culture. Oh, there's one more thing I forgot to tell you on that one. You don't need to look at it for me to give you that information, but it's rather an important point. Even though you have all this activity going on and all this huge, amazing structure, one of the things that you might expect to find around this huge, amazing structure, perhaps it and the big houses that are around it, you might expect to find a big defensive wall. But we don't. They are definitively not defended. They didn't expect attackers, or they expect that perhaps their proximity to the sea alone was sufficient to guard them against any attackers. Unfortunately, 2250 BC was not the last set of destructions ever to be experienced by the Minoan people on the island of Crete. Another wave of destructions hits about 400 or 500 years after that, in 1700 BC. This is an island-wide catastrophe. We think it's probably potentially a natural phenomenon like an earthquake. Many of these big sprawling structures are destroyed during this period. But Minoan society recovers once again, and these palaces are rebuilt on an even larger scale than they were before. And this time, they don't just use that cut stone for the bottom and then just do the rubble above. No. They use stone extensively to line the inner walls and to embellish living chambers and baths. But 250 years later, all those efforts seem to be in vain because, again, they experience a devastating wave of destructions. Again, it's an island-wide catastrophe. Those new palaces are all obliterated. Almost all of them are destroyed by fire. 2 of them may have survived, i.e. had some sort of limited continued occupation for maybe even up to 100 years. The culture itself is all but annihilated. We don't see future evidence of Minoan material culture really after that. In fact, what seems to happen is shortly afterwards, the island is taken over by a completely different cultural group. And that's a cultural group that we're going to talk about in more length today as well, but just a little bit later. I'm not quite done with our Minoans yet. I have lots and lots of beautiful pictures to show you. And that cultural group, as you can read here, are the Mycenaeans. So we'll get to know them a bit better as well soon. So how do we know what we know? So the first person to lead excavations on the island of Crete was a man by the name of Sir Arthur Evans. There he is. And he begins at about 1900. So about nearly 120 years ago now. Arthur Evans. You know, there are whole books written on Evans trying to figure out why he did what he did. He wasn't necessarily an archaeologist. He was somebody who was interested certainly in things like geology. But this was an era in which countries were, especially European countries, were competing to make great discoveries with respect to archaeology, to rediscover lost civilizations. And I think that was romantic to Arthur Evans, and he wanted to get involved too. Some say there were psychological issues with respect to competing with the fame of his father. I can't even remember what his father did off the top of my head. I think he was a geologist as well, but he was quite famous for his time. So in short, Arthur Evans traveled around a lot, and you know, I think he sought a way to make his own name, his own fame. It also should be noted that Arthur Evans was fascinated with Greek myth. You've heard, I'm sure, some of the stories. Most people have heard of Homer's tales, the Iliad and the Odyssey. But the Greeks have a whole variety of myths that captured the imaginations of people for millennia. And Arthur Evans is coming from a time that is pre-TV, pre-internet, pre-telephone, a time when only the wealthy owned books, and owned books he did. And this is also a time when a young affluent man's education, I stress the man in particular, a good education of a young affluent man was one in which he was well versed in the classics and the classic myths. Now, one of his favorites is the myth of the Minotaur. Most people have heard of it, at least in part. In the myth of the Minotaur, making it very short, basically we have a famed king on the island of Crete by the name of Minos. Minos's wife had a dangerous liaison with a very handsome bull. The outcome of that liaison was the birth of a half man, half bull. This is a monster. So Minos needs to try and control this monster. He can't kill it or the gods will be basically, yes, it's a bad thing. The gods will be unhappy, especially Zeus. So he has to somehow contain it. And so what he does is he builds a great maze or a labyrinth underneath his palace. And it is so confusing that the Minotaur can't find his way out. But the Minotaur must be fed. And only the best for the Minotaur. After all, he is royal and of the gods as well. So he eats young men. Yeah, young men. So various places in the Aegean send him, I think, yearly tribute of their young aristocratic males who are fed to the Minotaur. So I think it's the king of Athens who sends his son Theseus. And he's very upset that, he has to do this, but yet he does it nonetheless. But Theseus tries to assure his dad, it's okay, Dad, I'll come home. He's like, but no one ever comes home. But anyway, so Theseus gets there with the other youth that are going to be fed to the Minotaur. But Minos has a daughter as well. Her name is Ariadne. And she takes one look at Theseus and said, "Oh, wow, he is just, oh my goodness." She just, yeah, just, it was over. Love, first sight. And so she's distressed because this is going to be her half brother's dinner. So she decides to help Theseus in some way. So basically, she sneaks him his sword, for starters, that he can just somehow hide in his clothing. In addition to sneaking him his sword, she gives him a ball of string. So basically, Theseus proceeds into the labyrinth. Eventually, and as he's going, he unrolls the ball of string so that he can find his way out. And eventually, he encounters the Minotaur, pulls out his sword, thrusts and kills the Minotaur, and promptly finds his way out, grabs the princess, gets on a ship with some other people of fame in the myths, and sails away. All is well for a little while until they dump poor Ariadne off in some island and then continue on their own, which is really, really kind of sucks. Never mind. So that's more or less the end of the tale. It gets more complicated there because he goes home, but his dad doesn't know, and his dad commits suicide, and it's tragic, and I won't get into those details. But the point is that Arthur Evans, yes, was particularly fascinated with that tale and believed that there might be some truth in it, although I'm not really sure how that's possible. But anyway, he believed that perhaps there truly was at one time a King Minos. Hey, it could be. Not sure about the Minotaur thing, though. So he goes out in search for the kingdom of Minos on Crete. And meets people, asks about. Someone brings him out to a big pile of ruins with the foundations of what appears to be, a sprawling palace of some sort or huge settlement. So he gets convinced that perhaps this is the key to finding the truth about Minos and perhaps making his big discovery and becoming famous. So he promptly buys the land that the ruins are on and starts digging. Well, not himself. He hires others, of course. Look at him. Imagine getting his hands dirty. So here it is. Here's the big pile of rubble. Now this has been cleaned up since then. This is an aerial view of the ruins of Knossos, and surely I think it is definitely worth notice to see that all this construction, this big of a space was settled with such formidable construction methods. So it's also on a bit of a mound. It's kind of hard to see here, but it is the foundation of all these buildings are built on an earthen mound. And that earthen mound is basically made up of Neolithic occupation materials. So reminding you about that, we're going to take a little tour of Knossos, have a look at some of the images here. Here is the grand staircase. This is the staircase that would eventually lead up to the residential quarters. And remember that this place could be 5 to 7 stories tall. And those are the columns I talked about. Beautiful cut blocks here. Residential quarters would include quarters that certainly Evans identified potentially as the king's quarters, and those he identified as the queen's quarters. This word megaron, I don't even know why I'm perpetuating it. It really doesn't have a place here. Megaron specifically refers to a particular type of structure that is Mycenaean in origin, but this is Arthur Evans's label, so it's in all the literature. So it's really hard to ignore, even though it's highly incorrect. I talked earlier about light wells. Remember that? I was trying to explain how you make a big square hole, and put windows through it. Well, on the other side of this doorway is such a light well. So you can see how the light is coming into the room. This is not lit artificially whatsoever. It's lit by sun. So one of the things that we get, especially at the other site that we're going to look at later, Akrotiri, is evidence of extraordinary wall paintings that that were placed up on the walls of virtually all the grand architecture. So in Akrotiri, we'll see lots and lots of houses with amazing wall paintings. I won't show you the houses so much, but I'll show you the paintings. And here we do have a little bit preserved, in particular in what might have been certainly residential, elite residential quarters, with these amazing dolphins and fish, and these flowers, lotuses. Some people have called them. A lot of the iconography we see from the Minoan world focuses on the sea. I mean, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's an island. On all around the edges, what you have, the sea. So we see a strong prevalence for sea images of sea life, etc. And I'll show you that in other images. Primary colors are important: blues, yellows, reds. Here, remember those magazines that I showed you, those little storage areas in the map. Here's a picture of some of those storage areas. Here's a magazine right here. In the magazine, we see a couple of different types of storage going on. We see these under the floor spaces that would have been covered with slabs of stone, but also these large jars. I think I already introduced. Yes, I definitely introduced you to this word more than once already. This is a pithos. It's really, really big. Pithoi in the plural. And here's some more on the bottom picture. These are all some more pithoi. Do you see that they're slightly different? Some of them come in different shapes. These are really wide-bellied ones. This is a smaller-bellied one, and this one's more sort of straight up and down. They all functioned as storage. They didn't have furniture in the way of dressers. They would store food like grain, or water, or grapes, or sometimes we find them filled with things like, I don't know, scrap metals. I mean, they're the sort of everyday ubiquitous container. They also have a secondary use. Sometimes, in fact, on the island of Crete, it's probably the most common way, sort of the most common container for burials. So they have a second. So after they've been used in some way, primarily for storage, if somebody dies, then their body is placed in big jars like this, and then buried or put into crevices in rock walls and so forth. So it's one of the most common forms of burials. In these contexts, these aren't burials. These are pithoi that are being used for storage exclusively. So one thing I mentioned earlier when I was trying to sort of describe or find words that made sense with describing these buildings, palaces, temples, sprawling villages, things, I mentioned that there were others on the island, and that they were these red dots, right, the palace sites, and mentioned that there were commonalities between them. Now, one of the things I want you to notice here is they are not identical, right? They are in no way identical. But one of the things that should really sort of jump out at you as common between all three is the big open space. That's a central court. And we think that that was a community meeting place, perhaps a place where, the residential elite would address large groups of people, perhaps where rituals and were also took place. Other commonalities might include, magazines, but in a different, area, but yet the same. Just look at this one here at Phaistos, right? Look at all these magazines here. They're not so dissimilar to some of the storage places also used at Knossos. Or at Malia. Key iconography. There's a couple of symbols that pop up in imagery or in three-dimensional objects made out of stone or ceramics or incised on things or painted on things. Bulls are one of them. Lots and lots of bull imagery. On the right, we see it's actually surprisingly a container. So behind his horns there would have been a place to pour fluid in, and then if you tip him over, fluid would come out his mouth. On the left, this is a ceiling. And I'll show you some more seals and ceilings today as well. But like other places in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, and as well as in Indus Valley, groups of people, especially involved in trade, would use a signature method or in terms of ensuring that goods packed in a particular basket or pot or whatever they're packed in are sort of assured by that person as complete. So on the left here, this picture of this bull with an anthropomorphic figure on top, that would have been something that was stamped into clay and acted as a sort of signature. Now, each of these is meant to be unique. This, I guarantee you, though, is not the only seal or sealing by the way, a sealing is just an impression of a seal. It's not the only one to have included a bull image, but by the sheer number of images of bulls on them, we can see how important that the image of a bull, for some reason, was definitely a key image for Minoan culture. I'll talk more about this strange relationship between the bull and this human on top again in a few minutes as well. Another key iconographic symbol was what Arthur Evans termed as horns of consecration. And here we can see, you see these sort of stone horn-like objects, but we see them as well drawn on things or also as well as three-dimensional objects. They're probably, we think, representing bull's horns as well. So again, a connection for somehow the importance of the bull. I mentioned this already, the importance of this double axe symbol, and we'll see more examples of these things in some other images I'm going to show you in a little while. Now, let's look at Minoan culture a little bit closer. And to do so, I've sort of organized it into themes. We'll look at the writing, the maritime capacity, warfare, images of town and country, agriculture, religion, ritual and sport, religious ritual imagery, and just some more cool stuff. Writing, keeping it simple. Yes, they engaged in writing. And their language we have termed, for lack of a better term, Linear A. That's to differentiate it from the language that's used on the island after we see the demise of Minoan culture, Mycenaean. That particular linear language we call Linear B. We have deciphered Linear B. Linear B seems to be an ancient form of the Greek language. Linear A is not. We're not sure what language is written on the Linear A tablets. What we do know, however, is that one of the things that they're using them for is counting stuff. Like many written languages, in fact, I can't think of one that's an exception right now. So I might even stick my neck out and say all written languages initially came about for administrative purposes, keeping track of stuff. How much do we have? How much did you get? How much do I owe you? That's the sort of thing. How much can I expect to get? Taxes, inventories, things like that. A way of keeping track of stuff. That seems to be happening here. Especially look at these the hatch marks next to each other. Seems to be counting. Is each mark 1? Is each mark 10? Are the circles 10? Do we have 5 hatch marks? So we've figured out some of the numerical qualities here, which include the hatch marks and the circles. What we don't know is what these other symbols stand for. Are they pictographs? Probably. Of what? Maybe we can guess some of them. They were on an island. They looked to the sea for their resources. They got there somehow, and it wasn't by walking. So, of course, they know about boats. And if you wondered for sure if they did, all you have to look at the wall paintings. So these are wall paintings from the island of Thera, modern Santorini, from the town of Akrotiri. We'll spend more time looking at images from that town, but here I wanted to show you some just so I could assure you they are very sophisticated with respect to transporting themselves by boat. So no motors on these boats, but there's plenty of rowers here. As you can see, we get to see all the different rowers. I don't know if you can remember. Can I cut and paste this particular image in the end of the boat here for us to look at later? So cut and paste it in your brain. It's also, we see a similar image on one of the wall paintings at Akrotiri. We're not 100% sure why it's on the wall painting of Akrotiri. We'll also discuss some of these other paintings elsewhere. The top one that we see over in the left here, we'll look more closely at what's going on there. Warfare. Did they fight other people? Now, we already discussed the fact that they don't have any defensive walls. Does that mean that there's some kind of, I don't know, skipping through the meadow, peace-loving, never fighting? No, of course not. It means they didn't feel threatened. All peoples, will fight if forced to do so. Some peoples look for it. Some peoples defend themselves. We certainly know that Minoans were capable of fighting. And in this particular picture, we see a couple of things going on of interest to us. For starters, we see some sort of structures here. And apparently we are near the sea as well. And these structures we think are probably ship sheds. And we see people with helmets, a sort of uniform, right? All sort of common helmets. These helmets may well be made of boar's tusks, boar tusks. And then we see their shields that seem to be made of animal hides. And then they're all carrying spears. And so those appear to be warriors and the successful ones, because over here, lying at the bottom of the ground, are unsuccessful warriors. So definitely, warfare, it's a part of humanity. So looking a little closer, I told you we'd look at this one closer. I'm just focusing in the far left side of this big, long painting and trying to see what's going on and what we can discern about Minoan culture. Sure, yes, maritime. We know that the sea is important, and they've mastered, nautical skills here. They have boats that row. It appeared that, interestingly enough, I think these people are covered, perhaps from the sun, while they're rowing the boat. But we also see what's interesting is sort of townscape, right? So we're getting sort of a view from the sea, perhaps from a boat, in which we are seeing the outline of the town and the people in the town, and multi-storied structures, not unlike those palaces, with windows and columns, perhaps not unlike those palaces. So this is them sort of painting them, perhaps. We see people looking out over the walls of these structures, people engaging in activities near those places. And I think what we're looking at here in the background, though, is the landscape. The artist is trying to show us what goes on behind and beyond that town. All of a sudden, we've switched to sort of a cutout version of, of a landscape. The blue probably are rivers or creeks or streams, waterways of some sort. Ups and downs are mountains. And what is active back there in this countryside? Why, apparently a lion who is chasing some deer and trees. And it's quite fascinating. It's very colorful. Sometimes we wonder, is this an everyday landscape, or are we painting something that's kind of fanciful or surreal? We know they engaged in agriculture for based on certainly tools that we have found in the archaeological record and evidence of farming, certainly in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, but they've also left us some representations. This is a vase from the site of Ayatriata, and it's called some people call it the harvester's vase or the winnower's vase. And it's interesting that we see groups of people clearly heading out to the field to cut or winnow the grain, and they're doing it in song. So this guy seems to be some sort of leader person, and here's the group of laborers and workers, and here's a guy singing as they go on their way. We know that they practice a religion, but remember, we can't read their documents, so, and we don't know if there's any references to the religion anyway. But we're not really sure about the details of their religion at all. We're pretty sure when we see elements that relate to it, though. So this lady up here that's holding the snakes with an owl or something on her head appears to be engaged in some kind of ritual, partly because we see her elsewhere. Down here in the ceiling, we see a similar lady with a flouncy skirt. Now, granted, that seems to be, in a way, what a lot of the Minoan ladies wore flouncy skirts. Minoan ladies wore dresses that bared their breasts, and I'll show you more examples of those. And the same thing is happening here, but here she's on top of the mountain. Well, we know that mountain peaks are especially sacred to them, and that's where their sanctuaries are. So since she's up here on the mountain and everyone's below, we think she's special, perhaps a goddess type person. This is a male entity here, perhaps in praise of her. We don't really know what his role is, and she's flanked by lions. Do you remember those horns of consecration? You see some more here on this structure. Is this a temple? Is that what's depicted here? If we look down on the painting at the bottom here, we see more of those horns of consecration. Is this another temple that's got columns? Do you see this structure? We think that perhaps it is, that this represents some kind of temple-y type place. And again, this particular gold ring shows, again, a female in the center, another one of these temple-type structures on the right, and males engaged in some kind of ritual. Perhaps these are little bits of wheat on the top here. Perhaps this is like the goddess Demeter in Greek religion, perhaps. It's the best I can do. Ritual sport. I had no idea what to call this slide. Because, right, boxer vase, boxing to me just isn't sufficient. Because, partly because we have yeah, I get the boxing type people. In fact, they're not the only boxers I'm going to show you. I have a great fresco from the side of Akrotiri showing male boxers. But you've got the whole bull thing going on here too. So what do you do when you cross a boxer with a bull? You tell me. Perhaps that. That's right. Remember that image we saw earlier when I was showing you bull iconography, and there was an anthropomorphic figure sort of on the top of a bull's head? Well, that wasn't a once-off. That was not the only sort of image we get of people on top of bulls. So here's another signet ring on the far left where we have a person on top of a bull, this time that they're not on top of the bull's head. They're upside down like they were in that other one, but they're upside down on the back. But they seem to be in motion. So is he coming from behind and is he about to go over the front? Or is he come over the front and he's about to jump off behind with his feet? I'm not really sure. But it kind of looks like he's jumping over a bull, right? How about down here? This is the most famous one, this particular painting that was found at Knossos. Always beware, though, when I'm showing you paintings. Look at, do you see how it's all patchy? What you get is a combination of what was actually there and what an artist has filled in that he or she thinks should be there. So the dark areas are areas where that was, remnants that were left behind. The lighter areas have been filled in. So looking just at this figure, sure, we get the head, we get the hands, a little bit of that back and in the middle, and of course then the legs. So that's possible. And this person in the middle, we do get much of that. So, and again, we compare it to other bits of other examples. There's just no arguing about it. It looks like they're jumping over a bull. Now, you're like, okay, enough of the bull jumping, but I just want to point out something else to you. Why is the guy in the middle brown and the guys in the other side white? Well, it appears that the Minoans tended to paint females with white skin and males with brown skin. Well, now that's interesting too. So, but it's also interesting that I already told you that females in Minoan culture tend to wear those big flouncy skirts and all. These individuals appear to be wearing the garb of a male. So, although they do seem to have jewelry on that the brown figure does not have, they seem to have jewelry. And so it seems to me very likely that the white individuals are women, and somehow they're engaged in helping this brown male individual jump over a bull. And we think perhaps it's ritual, maybe it's sport, maybe it happened on those big central courtyards in the palaces. Sorry to be so vague, but that's about all I have. Oh, pooh, this is a terrible picture. I'm so sorry because it's such a great thing. I'll try and replace it when I post this with a better quality one when I post the PDF. But I think you can just about make things out, although I'm terribly distressed because it's a really cool picture. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. Over on the left, I want to bring your to attention that you have examples of those double axe images, so that we think are associated with ritual. So there's some double axes. We also have a line of 3 women bringing containers of fluid to some central and dumping it into some central place here. On the far right seems to be the edge of one of those temple type structures that we've already seen in some of the other places. and some male figure that is prepared to receive the offerings from these other individuals that are coming in a row. So we think that this scene basically depicts a temple ritual offering type scene, in which things are being brought to the gods. Perhaps this is our priest over here. Yeah, that's the best I got. So I'll try and get you a better image of that. So now for just some fun eye candy. What it helps us get an idea of what the world looked like through the eyes of Minoan people. So we're going to look at some of the stuff that they made. First, I want to show you these two ceramic pieces. The one on the left is without question a Minoan, but this kind of sort of gaudy appliqued pottery was only popular for a short period of time. Much more common is the kind of vessel you see on the right, which also depicts scenes from the surrounding sea. Here's another one. Yeah, no, it's not the same one. It's different. So if I go back, you would see that the previous one had a design on the neck here. So this is just a very popular theme, and I showed it especially to illustrate the fact that it is a popular theme. So, but also these depict waves. We're pretty sure these are showing the waves of the ocean, and not really, yeah. So this also is depicting, showing some waves, and perhaps a net back here. Perhaps they fished with nets. This, in addition to sea life, the Minoans are interested very much in the natural world, and I'll show you some more paintings to back this up. But this still, it could be, the designs on here could represent the natural world on land instead of sea. We call these bird vases because we think that they quite intentionally are meant to look like birds with a beak and eyes. And then the vase on the right, again, it's a familiar picture, but completely different shaped vase. But again, clearly a very popular theme. This one on the left, some more, both of these are showing, in fact, images of the sea. Again, so this is probably a net, just like that other one. And here's a fish. And here we have more sea life on this vessel. I told you earlier that the majority of the population was probably buried in pithoi that had been taken out of use. A small percentage of the population seemed to be buried in these little ceramic type coffins, which are called larnakes, or a single one would be a larnax. Sometimes they're decorated very, very elaborately. Other times they're decorated much like they are other ceramic vessels. This may depict, may or may not depict elements of the sea. But when we see this checkerboard pattern on the sides here, and you see a checkerboard pattern here, what we think we're probably seeing is evidence of burial shrouds, woven things that the bodies are wrapped in. We continue to get this kind of pattern, particularly on larnakes, and we also see it in funerary vases a little bit later on in the Aegean. So it seems to be a pattern, a reference to that burial shroud over a very long period of time. So I talked about seals, didn't I? Rings and sealings. Going to show you some examples about these. Are all used for a signature, to say you would smush it into clay, as I said before. It's your way of saying, I give you my word, or here I hereby sign this, or the contents of this are sealed by me. Here's a great variety of them. Here's another bull leaping image at the bottom. That's the sealing of this particular seal. Sometimes the seals are worn on a chain. Sometimes we just find the stone that maybe they had been put in something else. Other times we see them as part of a ring. So on the left here, we have a variety of scenes. There's an anthropomorphic figure, a zoomorphic figure. In the middle here is a scene that'd be really familiar, well, mostly familiar, let us say, in the Near East. Kind of, we call her sometimes the mistress of animals. It's perhaps a goddess type figure flanked by animals, but in this case it's very Minoan in that she's got the double axe above her head. And finally here is the last scene, an anthropomorphic figure standing behind a zoomorphic figure. Here's some more. This is a griffin, right? Sort of lion, eagle-y creature, fantastic animal that's also familiar in the Near East. And here, for once, we're not jumping over a bull, but bulls are important. And here's one at rest. Here's our another one of those mistresses of animals with the double axe over her head. And here's the impression I showed you earlier when I was talking about goddesses and horns of consecration and temples and that sort of thing. But again, see that she's flanked by animals, much like the mistress of animals is up here. More animals. Here's a goat in a tree. Yes, of course, goats do that, and this is one doing it, sitting in a tree. Here's another bull. This one doesn't seem very restful, but no one's jumping over it. And the Minoans made some incredibly beautiful jewelry. They're really fantastic gold workers. They're using, however, some particular techniques that are specifically coming from Western Asia. We think that it may be that craftsmen from Western Asia have actually immigrated over here and begun to, relocated and are working there. And then the techniques are sort of catching on. I don't know for sure. Especially this filigree method, all the tiny little balls of gold. Beautiful, huh? Sort of bee pendant is very popular. And here we have our mistress of animals again, flanked by the ducks, but also these snakes. Another beautiful piece of gold jewelry, flanking animals, discs and birds at the end of these chains, and the remarkable use of a red stone that is not indigenous to Crete, coming all the way from the Indus Valley. This is carnelian. One of the things that the Minoan craftsmen are particularly talented at is creating things out of rock. They make the most beautiful stone vessels. And here are just two examples, the left one being made of rock crystal and the right out of serpentine. Here's some more of them. Sorry, I couldn't get rid of this Getty Images tag, but you can see how they intentionally choose the stone for its grain and make just such lovely, lovely objects. All the objects on this page are created out of stone. And here is another object created out of stone. This is this particular vessel is called a rhyton, and it's made out of chlorite, and it's found at the site of Zakros. Now this is interesting because what we have is one of those temple-like structures again depicted, and this time we have a bunch of goats sitting on top. Perhaps because that's just what goats do. I promised you a couple of sanctuaries. So I'm going to show you one mountain sanctuary at Euctus right here. And I'm going to also show you one cave sanctuary. So peak sanctuary or mountain sanctuary is the one at Mount Euctus. Aloniki is its name. I've given you this map just so you can see the height and the contours of its location. So that's at the bottom left. The top right here is a map of the foundations of the sanctuary. Yes, an actual structure is built up here. A sort of temple built on top of this peak. And here is a view of the remains of that temple. Here's some more pictures of the remains of that temple on the top of Mount Euctus, on the site of Alanaki. And here's some examples of some of the things that were found at the site. So this is what this probably is these are examples of a religious ritual whereby an effigy of often a body part or the thing, whatever it is that you're requesting the gods help you with. In fact, I think that it still happens in places like South America in Catholicism, where people bring effigies of the thing that they need, that they're asking the gods or God, depending on your religion, to help them with. So here, somebody's clearly had the misfortune of having one of their cows give birth to Siamese twins, a two-headed calf. So they're trying to remind the gods that this thing happened, so perhaps seeking direction or some help in the matter. Some people are having problems with their legs or with their arms or their hands. Here we have a leg and an arm. This one's got a clear headache, and this guy seems, well, yeah. Cave sanctuary. Elithia. This is the name of this particular cave sanctuary. How do we know it's a cave sanctuary? Well, it's a cave, and then they build a temple in the cave. So you can see here the foundation of this temple. So not only do you get material remains, we can actually see that they modify the cave, creating an appropriate ritual space in a place that's already sacred, presumably. So I'm afraid that's all I can do there, because otherwise this will last for an entire week. So the reason I'm presenting you with this map again that I presented you before is because I'm going to move us geographically from the island of Crete. And I want to go to look at now the island of Thera, ancient Thera, modern Santorini, at the town site of Akrotiri. So looking a little bit closer now here this is the whole set of Cycladic islands, many of which you were asked to write on your map, so they shouldn't be completely foreign to you. And here, honing in closer, is just the island of Santorini, and here is an aerial view of this particular island in the map. So, as I said before, we are fortunate because they were unfortunate, I suppose, in that the town was destroyed by a volcanic eruption around 1700 BC. This is coincidentally the time of the second to last destruction on the island of Crete, and many scholars have tried to find a connection between these two events. So this is an island-wide catastrophe, but is definitively an eruption, whereas the one on Crete may well have been an earthquake that came from the same, geologic event. So here's a few random pictures. Much of the town here has been excavated, which is why they have been forced to cover it, because if they don't cover it, then rains and winds and so forth will make what remains deteriorate. So it's rather expensive sometimes to do large archaeological digs, because then you're responsible for somehow preserving or maintaining what you have exposed. So here are some more structures, including things like pithoi, and here is a bathtub. Yeah, we think it's basically just a bathtub, perhaps for ritual use, perhaps just for bathing. So here's a general map of the town to see, showing the walls of structures that have been found. What kinds of remains? Well, architectural, you can certainly see from the map. All kinds of examples of material culture, pottery, etc. But some of the most extraordinary remains in this particular town, because of its preservation, are the wall paintings. So that's pretty much what I'm going to focus on here, trying to get us a better understanding of who these people are, and through the imagery that they had inside their structures. So we're going to look at various motifs like floral motifs, animals in nature, women, men, daily life, and ritual. Apparently, we're not going right away. Well, looking at our architecture here, certainly, we can see that this is a multi-storied structure as well, much like those palaces on Crete. And I like this particular picture because this shows pithoi. In fact, this guy's sort of roping it together so it doesn't fall apart. He's reconstructing this pot. But what he's doing here for me, thank you very much, sir, is showing you how a man might fit inside of it to be buried. Okay, floral motifs I promised you. Voila, flowers. We first saw some floral motifs when we were looking at the queen's quarters in Knossos, when we saw all those lovely, lotus-type flowers in the same room with the dolphins. Those were not so dissimilar to those ones in the upper left here. We often see these type of lily flowers as well in the landscape. When we were looking at that townscape, remember when we were looking at the ships, and then we saw the town behind that, and then behind that was the landscape with the river and the mountains and stuff. I pointed out that the colors were often very vivid, and sometimes we're not so sure if they're trying to depict reality or something that is, well, surreal, something greater than reality. And this is a perfect example of the sort of painting that makes us ask those questions. Many have interpreted this painting as a depiction of the landscape and mountains, but yet flowers are not that big on top of a mountain, and mountains are not that strangely shaped. I wonder too, though, if we're not doing something similar that we were in that townscape, whereby the painter sort of brought the landscape behind the town up and turned it over so you could just look at it as if you were facing down. If that's the case, do we have some are we doing looking down like in an aerial view, kinda, sorta? Are these the edges of a waterway and a pond? But why all the weird colors? I just don't know. Natural world, lots of pictures of things in nature, things that seem very real. One of my favorite parts of the painting is Akrotiri are these sweet little swallows at the bottom. And that's actually from the picture I just showed you with all the lilies in that strange landscape. Should I go back? Yeah. See the swallows here? So we have this strange, colorful, surreal landscape, and all of a sudden we have these very, very sort of true to life little swallows up here, fighting, perhaps. I'm not sure what they're doing. We also have some very real looking other animals. Look at this duck, right? I mean, that's a duck. It's, on the other hand, right, the blue spotted cheetah creature, I don't even know what to tell you. Did they have blue spotted cheetahs? I just don't think so. I just don't think so. If so, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. They're all extinct, and we know. I don't know. This is a very like a natural looking bird, but again, being stalked by this not so natural looking animal. So, does this represent a surreal or an otherworldly place, or does it? Yeah, I don't know. These ibex type ibex creatures are beautifully drawn. Um, the curvaceous lines are extraordinary, but even there, they're not aiming at realism per se. And look at the ivy along the top there. Women. Now, I told you a little bit about women. We've seen a few women. I say that those flouncy dresses are really common. You can see in many of these pictures that kind of flouncy dress. Now, so let me guide you around here. Top left, right? So we have this two white-skinned people, right? Which I've already said are usually women. Well, always women, as far as I know. But there's a few points of confusion. Anyway, so let's call them women for the moment. Wearing a typical sort of dress. By the way, I've given you a sketch at the bottom right here of that type of dress, how you would wear the tunic, right? And then you have this skirt that goes over the top of the tunic. And the tunic is open at the top where the breasts then can be exposed. So, yeah, so you have this woman sitting, and then you have another woman that seems to be picking a plant near her. Now, look at the landscape they're sitting on. It's very like that one with the lilies, the up and down. Again, am I looking at something where I'm looking down on it and to the side of it simultaneously? Is that why? Or are they sitting on weird supernatural mountainscapes? Or, I mean, lilies grow well in wet lands. Are we looking down on a watery, pondy, marshy area? And then are the lady, I don't know. So here's a close-up of the ladies, and you can see her picking the plants, this one, and this one's actually also picking the plants. In fact, this particular, sorry, I should introduce you, this particular painting is called the Crocus Gatherers. We think they may be picking saffron, which is a product of a certain kind of crocus. More ladies. Looking at the top right is a artist representation of a room in a house where we've named it the House of the Ladies because there's lots of pictures of ladies in that house. Below are two depictions of the ladies in above. You see this one here is meant to be this lady, and this one here is this lady that's reaching over to this one who's mostly missing. It's much easier to see the bared breasts in this one. You can also see the bared breasts on this one over here. Her arm is covering her breast. So again, the flouncy skirt, right? The tunic type thing, and belted. So same type of outfit. Going down to the very bottom left. So we have another woman, clearly, and she is also white. Also notice that all these women wear earrings. Clearly that's the thing that women do, wear earrings. They often wear bracelets and necklaces as well. We don't see men wearing them so much. What else did I want to tell you about them? No, there was something else. Hair. I want to look at their hair because it's another point potentially of interest or lack of that lacks clarity. The late woman at the bottom here, full head of hair. Do you agree? Great. Woman over at the right here, full head of hair. Great. Oh, by the way, sorry, this is the same woman that's over here, not to confuse you. I have lots of repetitions here, forgive me, trying to get close-ups of the details. So women, but this woman, what's with the blue head, right? The woman to her left, she seems to have a full head of hair, but although she's got some blue band on it. But this one, what is this? It's special, the special blue cap with the ponytail sticking out, or the blue hair? Now that brings me to the woman in the bottom center. I say woman mostly because she's white, and women are depicted white. But she, like this woman, seems to have the blue hat on, which I'm going to suggest in a minute is not a hat, with the weird holes where the ponytails get to stick out. She, however, is not wearing the same outfit as all the other women. She's obviously either not one of the cool kids, or perhaps she's an especially cool kid. I don't know, but she's not like the others. So it's been said that perhaps this is some kind of incense burning situation, or this is some special function what she's holding, and that perhaps she is engaged in some kind of religious ritual, which then allows her to have a very special garment on of some sort. I'm going to talk about my blue heads more in a minute. Let's look at the boys here. Men. Jewelry? No. Except for this guy up here. But it almost looks more like a tattoo. I don't know. And he could have something going on here. But the rest of them, I don't really see much. They white? No. They're brown. Because they're boys. Okay. And they also don't seem to be clothed on the most part, except for our special guy at the top here, which is interesting. That was also the case when we were looking at all those warriors, right? The dead warriors, they were all naked too. So boys, seem to be naked, and the women seem to be wearing lots of layers of clothes. Very curious. Somebody cannot be comfortable in this climate is all I'm thinking. All right, what else do we have to say? Our boys have blue spots on their heads. Are they wearing the weird blue hats with the holes in them where their ponytails stick out? All but the guy on top with the fancy hat. Now this guy on the top with this fancy hat, we think might be someone a little special. He's got a fancy hat, right? That's got to make you special. And he's wearing clothes. Perhaps he's super special. He's been called a prince by many. This is a particular painting found. Actually, sorry, I've messed with you. We're not all accurate here. All the images on this page, except for this guy in the top from Knossos and the images here from Ayatriata. All the rest are from Akrotiri. So this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm going to suggest. Is that men in particular, especially young men, seem to have hairdos whereby much or part of their head is shaven. And I think that is what the blue stands for, is this shaven portion of the head. And it's everything shaven but some tufts of hair. I don't think they're wearing blue hats. I think they're partially bald. For one reason or another. Here's a very young man here, young boy, who's almost totally bald. I think that it might be a sign of either age or class for a man to have a full head of hair. Thus, our princely guy seems to be, have a lot of hair. And also that would bring me to the cup down in the bottom here, where we have this depiction that we don't completely understand, whereby a taller man with a full head of hair who gets to wear clothes is handing what appears to be potentially a staff to this younger man who stands shorter and more awkward, who has a bald head and a ponytail. And some people see this particular cup as maybe a ritual passage from, sort of father to son, of king to prince sort of thing. I don't know if we should see that much in it, but perhaps we do see different levels of Minoan society that have to do, certainly, I would suggest, with age, and potentially as well with social status. Daily life, we already really talked about this. I don't know why I wanted to show you this again. Probably because I just couldn't get enough. I'm going to pass on this. I think I covered most of what I wanted to talk about with these images, about what people were doing in them. One more, actually, I've got at least two more images for you, two more paintings that I want to discuss from Akrotiri. This one is interesting because this particular painting was found as a part of what do we call? I'm just going to use the word they use, which I have here, lustral basin. Yes, there's a big, giant, depressed area that appears to have held water and has a drain. It's a giant, like almost like giant baptismal basin that you would, and I shouldn't use a loaded word like that, but I just did, in which you would emerge. Maybe this is just the Minoan equivalent to the super jacuzzi tub. There's no evidence for bubbles being blown in, by the way. And so next to it, we have this image of a woman who is disrobing, taking off her necklace, and what appears to be getting prepared to go and immerse herself in this tub, we think. But also painted in this room is this depiction. Some things are familiar. This on top looks like those horns of consecration. This here is reminiscent of two things. A little bit of some of those drawings of the little temples, but also of a doorway. Now, as a doorway, what is it a doorway to? Is it to another world? Is it to another realm? As a temple, what would it be doing in the bathtub room? So perhaps scholars speculate that this particular room has, some sort of ritual or religious importance, and the bath was used to, enact some sort of ritual potentially. So the last painting that I'm going to want to talk about at Akrotiri is one they label the Goddess Group. So I have included this drawing at the top, not because it's accurate, because I really hate it, because I don't think it's very accurate at all, but at least helps you to kind of get an idea of some of the weird things that are going on and where everything goes together. Now, looking at the far left here, you see this woman bringing a basket in and potentially dumping it out. That's this woman here. So this is a very loose interpretation of this, in my opinion. But that's who this is. Again, she's got a sort of a blue band on her head. I presume that this is not a shaved bit of head, but you know what? It could be a tiny little strip of shaveness. Why not? I mean, this could be all the rage next year. I mean, it could be. And she's clearly bringing a basket full of something and she's pouring it out. This painting in the middle here depicts this sitting entity who many have suggested is the goddess, that the person on the left is bringing offerings to this goddess, much like we saw in that very bad painting with a line of women bringing and pouring things into a big pot. Behind this goddess, okay, it's curious. Well, I mean, behind and in front of her, it's curious. Again, I think the artist has done a disservice into depicting what we actually have, but what we have is very fragmented. If you look in the bottom right corner of this slide, you see our goddess in the middle, right? But in front of her is something blue. It doesn't really look like the lizard man, I think, but it is blue. and perhaps it's a naked blue like the lizard man. And behind her is something with a wing. So this also suggests to people with these fantastic creatures, perhaps in waiting to this regal goddess-like entity, that this is a depiction somehow of the realm of the gods in the middle, with the goddess there and her servants that are perhaps bringing her maybe the offerings of the humans. And back here on the right here are humans collecting things to bring to their goddess as offerings. Because this, yeah, yeah, sorry, that's the best I can do. But looking at the details, we have white-skinned women with dark hair, perhaps a bit of shaving, but I don't know. Love the necklace on this goddess. You see all the little ducks in a row, isn't that sweet? Anyway, yeah, we could go on, but enjoy studying it on your own time. Woo! So, wow, we've done it. We've done the Minoans. Now that's a long portion. I'll try to make the Mycenaeans a little bit shorter, but I want to go through a couple of key Mycenaean sites in Greece. And then I want to look at their material culture as well, and try and look at that thematically. Then I want to do two more things before this is over. One is to just in like 4 or 5 maybe quick slides, give you a quick comparison. A lot of people can get a bit confused between the Minoans and Mycenaeans because there are some cultural similarities. So I'm going to help you find some ways to find real differences between them. And then finally, we'll just take a quick look at a shipwreck. Okay. All right. Okay, here's another map for you, getting us hopefully oriented. So you recognize that island of Crete where we've been hanging out, and then Thera, right? Those were Minoan areas. Cycladic culture, which you've read a little bit about certainly in last week's readings. And then finally, Mycenaean culture is going to encompass this entire area outlined in green. The important thing to remember, though, is we're not talking about the same chronological period of time in all instances. Granted, Mycenaean people were in contact with Minoan people, but if you look at the timeline here, it doesn't overlap entirely. Moreover, this map is a little deceiving. It's suggesting that the Mycenaeans dominated this entire region during their whole period, and that wasn't quite the case. But I did tell you, after we saw the demise of Minoan culture, what culture do we see coming on those islands? But the Mycenaeans. So as we go through time, the Mycenaeans come to occupy more or less this entire region. It doesn't necessarily start out that way. I mean, look at Cycladic culture, right? The dates of Cycladic culture are starting much, much earlier than Minoan and Mycenaeans. Obviously, at 2500 BC, this was not a Mycenaean area. This is strictly Cycladic. So, the map helps, and it also confuses simultaneously. Here's another one if that helps. This one's focusing mostly at this particular period of time when Mycenaean Greece is the fluorescence of Mycenaean civilization. And it shows where all the varying settlements are. But notice that the date that this starts is after that final destruction that we see happening in all of the Minoan settlements on the island of Crete. So, how do we know what we know about the Mycenaeans? Well, In part, we have Homer to thank. Homer is perhaps a poet. The ancient Greeks didn't even know who Homer was. They attributed these great epic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey to a guy named Homer. That's about all we know. But the tales themselves have endured over time, and they're still taught in schools today. I own multiple copies of them myself. So, those tales, do you remember how I said that Arthur Evans was fascinated by Greek myths? Well, there's a German guy by the name of Heinrich Schliemann who was also fascinated with Greek myths and especially the epic tales of Homer. He sought, just like Evans sought to find the truth in the ancient legend of King Minos, Schliemann sought to find truth in the Homeric tales of the big Trojan War. So doing so, he went and excavated in two places. Now, don't get me wrong; he was not an archaeologist. He had no particular background in these subjects, and don't get me wrong, he didn't actually talk to the governments of these countries or anything. He was a rich guy who wanted to show the world that these tales were true, and so he just went over and just started digging, which by the day today's standards will definitely get you in jail. So I don't advise it. Anyway, so the first place he digs is at the ancient site of Troy. Sure, we know where Troy is. We know there is a Troy. There was a settlement of Troy that lasted, thousands of years. But to be perfectly honest, excavations, were initiated at Troy by this particular gentleman, Heinrich Schliemann. And when he was excavating, he got down to what appeared to be a very rich layer that was marked by destruction. And Zaha, I found it. This is the destruction of Troy that's talked about by Homer. Truth be told, he's nowhere near that period of time, but he didn't know one, ancient layer from another. This is his wife, by the way, on the right. This is Sophia Schliemann. This is her wearing all the jewels that Heinrich Schliemann dug up in those layers at Troy and put on his wife and took pictures of her. And so in the First World War, I think it was, all those jewels went missing. And they've only, I think it was in the 60s or so, maybe even more recently, only just turned up again in some Russian museum. So you never know where these things get to, huh? Anyway, Heinrich Schliemann thinks he's found what he's supposed to find in Troy. So then he goes over to Greece, starts digging at a place that's still got this more or less the same name as it did in antiquity. And he's looking for the home of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek troops that's mentioned in the Iliad. And he digs at the site of Mycenae. So here is the site of Mycenae. We'll talk a little bit about what he finds there. He thinks he has, again, though, found evidence for truth of the Iliad. Unfortunately, he again finds stuff there, yes, and some of it's very opulent, especially the burial evidence, but the timing, which he knew nothing about, is unfortunately has nothing to do with that destruction later at Troy, nor any time period that would be near an actual battle as depicted in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Anyway, so here's Mycenae. It's still, we're thankful to Arthur Evans. I give these guys a hard time, and Heinrich Schliemann, not because of the fact that they destroyed opulent graves and that they were rogues out there just digging to find cool stuff and make themselves famous, but we're grateful for them bringing these areas to our attention, I think, and making they were forgotten places that were not being protected or investigated in any way. So, kudos to them for, kicking, the our field in the butt and making us pay attention to these places. Anyway, so Mycenae, like all Mycenaean settlements, and there were a number of them. Remember that map with all the red on it I showed you a minute ago? They were perched on high places, were defensive places where they could see what was coming. Indeed, this culture is much more concerned about defense than Minoan culture was. So here is in the bottom right is a reconstruction of the settlement, the walled settlement of Mycenae. And on the left here is a bird's eye view schematic map of that settlement. So here's the schematic map again. And one of the things I want to bring to your attention on that schematic map is right here, this particular structure. Do you see with the big circle and then the little circles around it, one big room with sort of two sort of what appear smaller rooms in front of it? This is called a megaron. This particular architectural design is called a megaron. And this is a signature architectural structure for Mycenaean culture. And wherever we see a Mycenaean center, we see this particular structure at the very center of it. This would have been the structure that was inhabited by the princely elite, the chieftain of that particular settlement. Here's my schematic map of the megaron, and here's an artist's reconstruction of what the inside of a megaron might look like. This is especially taken from little bits of evidence left behind at the site of Mycenae. So again, we have a situation that where ancient peoples have a deep appreciation for colorful environments. We certainly saw that the Minoans appreciated colorful environments, and here the Mycenaeans would have had all these areas painted as well. This big round circle in the schematic map is this big round hearth that would have kept this space warm. Often there is evidence of some kind of built-in chair situation to one side here, and that may have been like a throne sort of situation where the elite, the head elite person would have held court. These four small circles here represent these four columns. And then you can see that there's a level above, and ultimately a smoke hole at the very top of the structure to let out all the smoke. And then there's this sort of forecourt, and then this porch. In this picture, this reconstructed picture of the city of Mycenae, we see the Lion's Gate designated as the primary entrance right here. Well, here it is in real life, real time. There's the Lion's Gate. Their little heads are chopped off now, which is unfortunate, but these are two flanking lions, two lions flanking a central column. And so this would have been quite the ominous scene to have been confronted with upon entering the city. There's a better picture of it sort of backing up so you can see the whole entrance. You can see how really large this sculpture is and how incredibly large these blocks are. Here's another part of a wall where you can see that these blocks are positively cyclopean. So we use the word cyclopean because it's from also the story of Homer, by Homer, the Odyssey, in which Odysseus basically discovers a race of people called the Cyclopses, and he encounters these one-eyed giants that are so huge they can lift boulders this size. Yes, we call them cyclopean, these gigantic blocks that could only be lifted by giants. There was a couple of tomb types or burial types found at Mycenae. One of the grand burial types is a tholos tomb. Tholos tombs, you've gotten the term before this. You've gotten the term tholos tomb with reference to elite burials on Crete during the Minoan Age. Elite burials as far west as in Spain during the Bronze Age. So here is an extant burial. A Schliemann called it Treasury of Atreus, which is kind of a weird title, but I tell you that in case you encounter it in a reading so that you know it's the same place. It's a tomb. And here's a cutout view on the bottom right to show you all the different components of the tomb. The walkway from the outside down this long corridor is called a dromos, D-R-O-M-O-S. And inside the tomb, the method of construction is called corbelled vaulting. I think I have a better picture for you here. Yes, I do. Corbelled vaulting. You can see how the different layers are continuously placed closer and closer together, placing the weight centrally upon itself. Corbelled vaulting. Another type of burial was found within the city walls, and those were grave circles. In fact, there are two grave circles. Only one is indicated on this map, but I'm not really sure why. Grave circle A is the one that was dug by Schliemann, and that's the one shown in the map here, and that's the one shown in the photograph here. Within this grave circle are shaft graves. So within the big circle, we have individual graves in rectilinear shapes in shafts in which the body is placed down a long shaft. Here's an example. So the body would be placed looking right and then moving at C and going left. The body would be placed down a long shaft, and then the shaft covered by various stone slabs, and then surrounded with further stones, and then covered with earth. You can see the lining of these stone-lined shafts in the photograph here. So there are two grave circles, as I said, that I've only shown you evidence of one, but of the many graves in those grave circles, five of the burials had these golden funerary masks. The most famous of all these masks is the one on the left here, found by Schliemann, in which he declared was the mask of the man he was looking for, Agamemnon. It is not the mask of Agamemnon. It's nowhere near that period of time, but it is extraordinary and a little creepy. So here they are. Why masks? We're not so sure. These guys are interesting because they have particularly round, bald heads, little round faces. These are interesting because they really make the eyelashes prominent. This one, he's got a mustache and beard. So anyway, super fascinating, aren't they? That they're very thin, gold foil done in repose is the technique. This guy's got kind of a smile. I think that's interesting. Maybe it's just the mustache that gives him the appearance. Here's another item found in one of the graves. This is found in one of the shaft graves in grave circle A. I show you this partly because it's interesting. It's a seal. We talked about seals in the Minoan world as sort of a signature. This would have been the seal that belonged to the person interred in the grave. The imagery is important because, as you saw with the lion gate, that lions, whereas bulls were super important for Minoans, lions seem to be really, really important for these Mycenaean Greeks, and the fighting of lions, which is something you see happening right here. More lions, more swords from a different shaft grave. um, at Mycenae. But again, we see the importance of lions. And this is little swells of the sea, waves. And here are just a series of three lions. And here we have a group of men with shields and spears fighting lions. Lots of other cool items found in these graves. This beautiful gold sort of cup. A silver with gold bullhead, very similar to that. Actually reminds me a bit of that rhyton we saw in the Minoan world. Which reminds me of something that I need to make sure I mention, is that when the Mycenaeans and Minoans overlap, they were not only aware of each other, but they engaged in trade. And in fact, the Minoans influenced Mycenaean culture a lot. So we're going to see some elements when we look at Mycenaean paintings and things like that, which we don't have nearly as many. But we're going to see some elements that look a little bit familiar to us. Enough to know that the Mycenaeans admired many of the cultural traits of the Minoans. So this reminds me of that bull rhyton we saw when we were looking at the Minoan things. Here's some example of some of the pottery from Grave Circle B at Mycenae. It should look nothing like the Minoan pottery to you whatsoever. We don't see any sea animals, right? We don't see the elaborate embellishments. We don't see any references to really the natural world or the world of the sea. They tend to be largely geometric. More amazing grave goods from Grave Circle A at Mycenae, right? Just amazing stuff, lots and lots of gold, clearly something that they highly prized. And here's a rare sort of sculptural remain from Mycenae. We don't get much sculpture, from this particular age in the Greek world. We think it existed, but we don't have that much evidence of it. So here's a rare glimpse. Perhaps a goddess, if we're going to go with the same color scheme, and I would suggest that we should, because you're going to see more evidence in terms of females depicted with white skin and males depicted with brown skin. So here's some frescoes from Mycenae. Actually, I realized I just proved myself wrong, because this is a warrior, and yet he is white skinned and with a warrior's helmet, and I'm not really sure why. I just caused myself a problem there. I'll have to look into that. On the most part, we will see that, and we will see other evidence to back up, even though and my initial evidence is not backing me up. Here's a female. One of the key differences here is that Mycenaean women do not show their breasts. So here she is. In some ways, she's not so dissimilar. This is an interesting little part of a tile. What appears to be sort of a row of goats walking on their hind legs, using their front hooves like hands. I can't really help you in terms of what that really means. And then finally, here's another female down here holding bits of grain. This is probably from a ritual setting that I'm going to show you a picture of later. So let's look at another Mycenaean site to see what similarities we might see and other bits of evidence that we can pick up. So we're going to go here. We were just here at Mycenae, and we're going to go just a little over here to the southeast to Tiryns. So here is a schematic map of Tiryns, and here's what it looks like from an aerial view. Again, on a raised area so that they could, have a good viewpoint for if anyone was coming. Um, I want to show you a couple of things with this particular slide. Here I'm repeating the schematic map of Tiryns. The excavator of Tiryns have been able to show over time that it wasn't built in a day, so to speak. That the early phases of this particular site, looking back as far as, circa 2500 BC, there's evidence of occupation, but in a really minimal way. Going later in time, some of the structures that were there in the earlier 2500 to 2200 phase are completely gone, and we see new structures being built for 1400 to 1300. Remember, 1400 is about the year that we have the Mycenaeans occupying Crete. So this is 1400 really marks the time period of the beginning of a real Mycenaean florescence and the period of the Minoan demise. So what we did have in the very early phase here of 1400 to 1300 is that very the very iconic structure, this megaron, right? So compare this structure here to my example of a megaron up here. So from the very beginning, this is a part of the Mycenaean settlement as it grows over time. Let's see. Okay. Also, some Cyclopean walls. They're not, it's a walled, defensive, walled, enclosed town with use of really huge blocks. The gateway is up this ramp. There was a gate that actually closed. We see the remnants of a gate post, and we also see a narrow way. Same thing as at Mycenae. It's not meant for large groups of people to be able to get in at one time. So as people are trying to get up this ramp to get into the town, you can imagine them being plummeted from above with all sorts of weapons. And this gate was meant to be closed at one point in time. There's a postern gate. We find these in a lot of the settlements. This tiny little narrow gate that an army could never get through, etc. This little escape away place, perhaps. Interesting find at Tiryns is examples of a bath area, a big bath area with a drainage system. So I'll give you this map here that shows the stone. This is a map of this particular place. And this shows this drainage area right here. We see lots of interesting figurines from Tiryns. These are very Mycenaean in style. A lot of times Mycenaeans painted anthropomorphic figurines with very sort of, schematic bird-like heads. Do you see these pointed little noses with the big eyes? Pointed noses, big eyes, pointed noses, big eyes. This one's a girl. It's got boobs. So is this one. Breasts, excuse me. This one is a rare depiction, of mother and child, which is pretty amazing. And then we have some zoomorphic creatures down here as well. Oh, that's a poopy picture, but it'll do. I just wanted to show you, it's sort of funny. There's this strange signet ring, a ring, with a seal that you could press again into wet clay, and it was your signature. It's again this sort of parade of goats. It's super reminiscent, right, to that depiction at Mycenae of this weird line parade of goats. I can't for the life of me tell you what that is all about, though. A couple more interesting images from Tiryns. This one is very reminiscent of something Minoan almost with the dolphins. This, however, is very Mycenaean. We're going to find that a lot of our images in the Mycenaean world are aggressive and have to do with hunting, combating lions, killing various animals, either humans killing them or animals attacking, or in this case, dogs. So we potentially have someone's hand here connected to some kind of spear, but then we've got the image of of dogs also hunting a boar. Some people from Tiran's here is backing up my statement about the brown men, right? So brown men, 1, 2, 3, 4 brown men, and 2 white ladies. Again, I don't know about that one weird picture in the first slide of my scene, but so these ladies not bearing their breasts. Nobody is bald in any of these pictures. Nobody has blue heads. These are not Minoans, but they do, like the Minoans, see that women, prefer that women be depicted as white and men as brown. Here the men can be clothed, they're not naked, so definitely a different culture, but you can see how they would be able to communicate to each other. A Minoan could go here and say, well, it's not like ours, but clearly those are women and those are men, right? Here's some examples of women. Examples, I already showed you the dogs, sorry, and the boar hound. I also wanted to show you that there's a rare example of a bull in on a wall in Tiran's. And it may even be, can you make it out? A foot, a leg, an arm, right? I'm thinking those Mycenaeans knew what those Minoans were up to. There's not a lot of this kind of thing in the Mycenaean world, but if they put it on a wall, then they knew what it meant, which is pretty interesting. All right, going to show you just one more site, only 3. Pylos or Pelos, you can call it whatever you like, it doesn't matter. Some people, they have dubbed this the Palace of Nestor, which is another Homeric person. So here's Pylos down here in the Peloponnese. Pylos was excavated by this gentleman, Carl Blegen, over many years. This is my very favorite archaeologist photo. This is like, here he is, tired and hot on his sun chair with his pipe and his camera around his head. And here is a schematic map of the settlement, which is also in an elevated location, just like the other ones, and is walled, just like the other ones. And can you tell me what this is? Big room, 4 posts, central hearth, right? And the 2 porches. Bet you know the word. That's right, Megaron. So here we are with a schematic map of the key part of the settlement, and here we have, do you see the hearth down here? There's the big circle. Can't really see the post holes, but you can see that the first porch is there, and then the second porch would have been right here. Here's a closer look of the area with the hearth. And here's an even closer look at the hearth, and you can see remnants of paint. Do you see the remnants of paint? Right there along the edge. Pylos, we think, was a major center for the production of olive oil. And lots of evidence there for the production of olive oil, containers and presses, and lots of tablets. We probably get more tablets from Pylos than anywhere else with written in Linear B. We also have big Tholos tombs at Pylos. This particular one, there's not much left of it, just sort of the base and the doorway here. And this is located just about a kilometer below the, down the hill from the palace. And this one is much better preserved. This one's located just northeast of the palace. Here's the long dromos, right? The walkway leading to the entrance. And here is just a random sampling of the kind of finds we found at Pylos. Largely, these are all undecorated, but you can see the sorts of shapes that they used habitually. And we have some paintings at Pylos, some of them quite interesting, including this particular person, who I find super fascinating. Love the big bird, too. Clearly, this is a musician, right? And that's amazing. But if our women are white and our boys are brown, what is this person? Because this person appears dressed in the way that the women were dressed, right? So I suggest that this is a woman, and that but because she's a musician, and musicians we certainly learn from Homer's tales, are persons that traveled around from sort of court to court. Even back in fact, this tradition of traveling musicians went on for well, millennia, to be perfectly honest. So I think that she is a dark-skinned person who is known for her amazing talents and is traveled to this location and is celebrated, and they to such is so celebrated that she is memorialized on the walls of this palace, and that she's coming from perhaps places in Africa. I told you those Mycenaeans were a little bit aggressive. Yes, here they are in their BVDs, all getting all tangled and upset at each other with sharp objects in a river. Brown legs. Okay. And I promised to show you her in her cult setting, didn't I? So we think that this is some kind of cult center. I'm about to confuse you, and I don't mean to, but I find this disturbing, so I'm going to point it out to you, and perhaps I should just not. Horns of consecration. So do we have a cult that is shared by Minoan people and Mycenaeans? Is this a place perhaps for the use of Minoan people who were living amongst the Mycenaeans? We had a goddess in the Minoan world that held bits of grain in her hands. Remember, she was Demeter-like. Is this her? Not trying to confuse you, just letting you know how much we don't know. I think they're the last ones I have to show you. Here we have a charioteer in his helmet, perhaps going off to war. And actually just a beautiful design, floral design that would have been on the walls in Pylos. A few cool finds from Pylos. This lovely a repoussé cup with little waves all over it, gold. Some daggers with wild, scary animals. This one's got images of the sea. This is, I think, lions again. And this is a picture of the archive at Pylos. Remember I said there were lots and lots of tablets of Linear B that told us a lot about things, including the olive oil business. And this is where most of them were found, at this big archive. And one of our newest discoveries at Pylos is a very rich grave, which they're calling the Rich Warrior Tomb. I've actually assigned you a very brief article called Grave of Griffin Warrior at Pylos Could Be Gateway to Civilizations. I'm going to show you a couple of the finds from that particular excavation that was just a couple of years ago. Here's a bronze mirror with an ivory handle. This is this in situ when they first found it. It's got something bronze laid over the top of it. But here it is. Beautiful. That's extraordinary to have existed. This would be an ivory comb. And here's an example of a linear B tablet. Yeah, that's Greek. And here's some more Greek, early Mycenaean Greek. Okay, so reviewing Mycenaeans, but more importantly, showing you in a thematic way what we know about Mycenaean culture and giving you more cool eye candy and looking at finds. Ready? Here we go. Reminding you, we just looked at 3 sites. All 3 of them, right, were walled citadels. All 3 of them had a central structure called a megaron. This is an example of the one at Mycenae. All 3 of them had giant stone walls, defensive walls, with huge blocks that only a giant cyclops could possibly lift. More walls, not as cyclopean. All 3 of them had elevated defensible positions. This is the best picture I could give, but it shows that they're on mounds, shows that you can see the countryside from afar. All 3 of them actually had some sort of tholos tombs connected with them. We also saw shaft graves. And all of them had linear B writing. And then we saw some paintings looking at what women appeared like and what men appeared like. Looked at a little pottery. Didn't show you this one. This is one of my faves. This is one of the most famous ones. Quite honestly, most Mycenaean pottery is largely geometric, but occasionally we get scenes such as this. And when we do, it's often warfare, aggressive. So here they are in their helmets and with their shields and their spears, going off to war. And we saw some plain pottery from Pylos as well. Here's a few more examples of pottery that are not only geometric, that also show figures. This one shows a couple of people in a chariot, but the chariot is being pulled by griffins. And here we have a rare scene from nature, in which, surely we've all seen pictures of birds standing atop animals, picking off the bugs. Another example of people in a chariot in Mycenaean style. This lady is kind of interesting to me, I presume lady, because she has the swirly breasts. But often Mycenaeans tend to depict humans. Remember I showed you those little sculptures, and they all kind of look like birds with beaks and big eyes? Yeah, they paint them the same way. They're all like these little chicken-headed people. And here is a cup that I think feels to me a little bit inspired by Minoan culture, in that it's a depiction of sea life. And here, again, I'm thinking, right? Do you see it? You got yourself a bowl, although it's interesting. It's got a bird on its back for insect eatings as well. But okay, what is this person doing? Is it gonna jump over the bowl? Is it a Minoan thing? This wouldn't be I don't know. It's really interesting though, isn't it? Mostly this is what you get when you're looking at Mycenaean pottery. You get this geometric, you get these sort of lots of concentric lines, right? And These little concentric arches. These, yeah, very, very Minoan. Telling you, sculpture, we saw one of this is a rare, large depiction of probably a goddess. With these little bird type people. We know they're women when they have little pointy breasts. We had seen one that was nursing a child even, didn't we? Again, look at the beaks and the big eyes. This is a rare figurine of a little chair. Here's a zoomorphic one. And here, a lot of people think this is some sort of goddess. Perhaps she's got jewelry on. She's got little breasts. Her arms are raised. I don't know why she's a goddess and these aren't, but their arms are raised as well. I don't know why she, is a goddess and not not somebody who is praising the gods, perhaps, but I don't, not really sure there. Lots of cool metal work. Gold, gold, gold. Beautiful. This is probably the most extraordinary one. What is it? The Vallejo? I've spaced the name of this particular cup. I'll look it up for you. So just really extraordinary examples of gold metal smithing. And I showed you this seal from the grave circle. And some of these things that I've also showed you, all made of gold, the funerary masks. This is new. I don't believe I showed you before, but a lion, again, the lions are really important to this culture. Here's a silver pin. Is a little gold trinket box, and we saw the procession of goats. I promised you a couple of slides that would make it hopefully very clear about some key differences. So when you see this thing, it's Minoan, or when you see that thing, it's Mycenaean. Hoping to clarify some of this for you. So let's look. When it's talking about chronology, Minoan starts a lot earlier, but by 1450 they're gone. Mycenaeans, yes, they start up a little bit before, about 1600, but the height is really from about the time the Minoans are gone, circa 1400, right, to 1100. When we read about Minoans and Mycenaeans, they come with all these chronologic sort of codes. EM1 is early Minoan 1, which stands for a very specific period of time, as does EM2 or EM3. EH, early Helladic, talking about what's happening on mainland Greece, right, corresponds with early Minoan, things that are happening on mainland Crete. I have tried to reduce that for you in my conversation, and I haven't used any of that terminology. One of your readings, however, and I'm sorry, but it's a reading by me, it was primarily written for people who were comfortable with those terms. So I have supplied you with this particular chronological map, so to speak, when I'm using them. I'm usually just talking about the late Bronze Age. In fact, I think I'm exclusively talking about the late Bronze Age throughout that whole paper on trade. So just know, maybe don't, panic and look up all the dates all the time, and just know that you're more or less in this realm here. From maybe 1700 to 1200, in that 500 year range, when I'm talking about the intensive activity, trade activity in the Mediterranean. Geography, when you're talking about Minoan, you're really just talking about Crete and the island of Thera. That's it. When you're talking about mainland Greece, most of our conversation focuses over here in mainland Greece. When we're talking about Mycenaeans, it's in mainland Greece. They expand in later periods, yes. We know that at 1400 they're on Crete too. That can be the point of confusion when you have two different cultures on Crete at two different times. Architecture, you couldn't get more different, could ya? Right? With Minoans, you got that sprawling village thing, that never-ending palacey thing. But with Mycenaeans, you have a defensive um, citadel, right, on which it was on an elevated spot, um, always with the central structure called the megaron. Minoans, walls? Who needs walls? Maybe they should have had walls. They would have experienced less destructions, especially that last one, which seems to be quite violent. Mycenaeans, oh yeah, they're expecting visitors, and not nice ones at that. It makes you wonder if they're instigating things, and that's why they're expecting visitors. Always walled, big old walls. Cultural mindset. How do they perceive the world? On the left half of this page, I've tried to choose pictures that I think were really reminiscent of how the Minoans viewed their world. Nature. Flowy things, very flowy, very natural. Lots of sea images, but lots of land as well. Sometimes very real, sometimes fantastic. Mycenaeans tend to be a lot more aggressive, militaristic, or geometric, or lots of lions. Lions are big with the Mycenaeans, bulls are big with the Minoans. How does our pots look different? Hopefully side by side helps them look a little bit more different to you. On the left, right, sea images, lots of flowy, circular things. The right, geometry or fighting, right? It's very straight lines and rows of them, almost like as if the lines on the pots are rows of infantry. They're very, very line oriented, where again the Minoan's much more flowy, natural, going with the shapes of the pots or rocks that they're carving. Both languages are linear. How do you figure out which is which if you're on the island of Crete? Well, A is the first one, the one the Minoans used, the earlier one. The later one that's different language, that's also linear, is linear B. That's the Mycenaean one, the Greek one. As I said, I've got a whole paper for you to read on trade. It might seem long, but don't get disheartened by reading the paper. Face it, it's double spaced, so there's really not that many words in the whole paper. But I recommend having a look at this map when you're reading that paper, to look at the movement of goods and what kind of goods and where they're going and in what directions throughout the Bronze Age. It really, really would be a nice reference when you're reading that 2007 paper that I wrote. And now, finally, just a few slides to show you some of that. You've I think at least 4 times now, I can't even remember how many times somebody has brought to your attention in one of your readings the Uluburun or Kosh shipwreck. Multiple times. So, heck, it's about time that you had a look at it. Here we go. Shipwreck evidence from about the 14th century BC. So we think that this is more or less the route of the shipwreck, right? Problem is we don't know where it started or where it was going exactly, but it was doing this sort of circuit, we think, based on what was on board. So here's some great photos of the wreck itself, what's left of it. Here is a diver looking at the oxhide ingots as they were found in situ. In situ meaning how he found them, how they were discarded, the very location they were placed. These, we call them oxhide ingots. If you look in the top left here, you can see that they have the 4 pointy ends. Much like an oxhide, once you've skinned an ox, it kind of has these bits of leg skin at 4 corners, so it looks very like an oxhide. Or in addition to these oxhides that were clearly placed very carefully and stacked very carefully on the ship, you can almost see the outline of the ship by following the line of oxhide ingots here in its hull. There was also these bun ingots, a different kind of copper ingot. Perhaps they come from a different source. I think that they more or less weigh a similar amount, which is kind of interesting, but there must be some reason or significance for the difference. We find glass ingots. So this is basically raw glass that's being shipped as a raw material so that then glass blowers can use it and create things elsewhere. Now this is pretty amazing, but in terms of preservation, but ebony and cedar wood were not totally decomposed, and so they found that included in the shipwreck. So here's some examples of ebony and cedar. Animal products included this ostrich egg and ivory. Ceramics, a couple of examples. This is a Canaanite jar that actually still had olives inside of it. When we say Canaanite, we sort of mean, kind of more the area of modern Israel, Palestine today. Some pilgrim flasks, basically little vessels that like your ancient water bottle. Here's a base ring bowl. We call that specific kind of bowl. You see how it's got this whole sort of bottom part. It's almost like a cup with like a super huge rim. It's a funny looking bowl, isn't it? Anyway, here's a picture from Cyprus. Here's the Mycenaean picture. This is very like those bird-spouted vases that even Minoans used. Similar shape, but it's got a more bulbous body. Here's the Mycenaean goblet. Mycenaean stirrup jar and cup. See, very geometric, not very interesting. Decorations there. Some jewelry. Seashell rings with glass inlay. A gold pendant. Mistress of the animals, the female flanked by, she should have in her hands a couple of animals that match each other. Canaanite gold pendants. And here's a beautiful gold falcon pendant. Steatite scarab with a gold frame. Right, so the Egyptian dung beetle. Kassite, cylinder seal of quartz. Kassites were a group of people around Mesopotamia at the time. This is the cylinder seal, and this is the sealing. This is the impression that it gives off. Egyptian steatite plaque with hieroglyphics referring to the god Ptah, perfect in favors, Lord of truth. Northern Syrian cylinder seal of faience. Again, this is the faience seal, and this is the impression. Hematite cylinder seal. Now, all these cylinder seals are probably possessions of people that were on the ship, crew members potentially, or merchants. Hematite cylinder seal, originally carved during the old Babylonian period, but recarved during Assyrian times to include a winged griffin and a sickle sword warrior. Beads of Baltic ember. Do you remember your geography maps, your cartography lesson, right? Where's the Baltic? It's amazing that this one ship even had this much Baltic amber and was engaged in trading it. Here's various other beads of agate and faience. More faience beads. Duck-shaped cosmetics container out of ivory. Handle of that depicts a female acrobat. Decorative bone. ivory scepter. Here's some weapons and tools: Canaanite sword and dagger, bronze spearheads or bronze arrowheads, a bronze trident with barbed prongs, and some bronze chisels. Here's a bronze female figurine. She required quite a bit of cleanup. And a large gold chalice. A wooden writing tablet and a boxwood writing tablet, a diptych they call it, with 3 pieces of ivory hinge. Now, how these tablets worked are important for me to convey here. Do you see how in a way this is like a plaque, but with a depression? I could fill this depressed area with hot wax, and the wax would harden. And then I could, once the wax hardened, I could write in it. And then after I'd written what I needed to write, I could then scrape over it, smoothing it out, and write on it again. The same goes with this diptych, except for each of these areas would have been filled with wax. But they would have been used in the exact same way. And that's it. Thank you for your patience. More soon.